motion picture film. Let's tidy up this tangle of film by putting it on a reel.
Hello, listeners, and welcome to Film Swap. My name is David Seeley, and I'd like to introduce you to my esteemed co-host. He knows his bikes, and he knows the road we came in on. And he is the ecstatic gaucho himself, Mr. Jonathan Pritchard Barrett. Jonathan, how are you?
Hi, David. I'm very well, thank you.
Well, it's good to see you. It's been a little while since last we spoke.
It has. Yeah, that's summer. Busy time.
Yes, holidays. We went down to Cornwall.
Oh, lovely.
And spent a bit of time down there visiting family and friends and things. Yeah. How about you? Have you been on holiday yet, or are you going on holiday?
I'm going in a bit and go to France.
Oh, lovely. What are you going to do over there?
Going to be sort of just, I don't know, cycling, doing various sort of things with the children. And we're also going to go and see my mother-in-law, who lives there. And and then we're also going to Devon to see my elder brother and sister for just a long weekend.
Oh, fantastic.
So
we got lots of great plans. But, you know, is it fair to say that you kind of feel like you need a holiday after watching these crazy films?
Right. I definitely need a holiday after these.
They are just mind-boggling. And I know we did a few months back, we did a show called Mind-Bending Masterpieces.
We did.
But those films were a little bit more kind of artful, weren't they? Like more sort of mind-bending by design, weren't they?
Yes. And these ones are mind-bending by mistake.
Yes. Well, maybe. I mean, maybe House, our second film tonight, maybe not. So
that's much. A bit more artful, yeah.
Yeah. But definitely just totally mind-bogglingly crazy movies that we're talking about tonight.
Yes.
We thought, because the last couple of episodes we've done have been a little bit more kind of heady, serious kind of fare, haven't they?
They have.
So I thought it might be fun tonight to just have a little bit more fun, let our hair down a little bit and talk about. Now, we got to, how are we going to deal with the F in this phrase? Because obviously we're a clean show. We don't want to have excessive
funk, funk,
freak. Let's say freak. I was going to say fudge, but I thought that's going to be a bit awkward. So we're going to say what the freak?
Just come back from Cornwall, which is famous for its fudge.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, I didn't get any fudge when I was down there.
You're not?
No. I'm trying not to eat too much junky stuff lately. So, okay. What the freak is what we're going to say.
The freak sounds good.
What the freak? So tonight, the two films that we are talking about that we've picked are films that literally will make you go, "What the freak? What have I just watched? What was all that about? That's crazy."
Yes.
And so, I don't know, Jonathan, why don't you first give us a very, very brief introduction to the second film that we're going to talk about in the second half of the show.
Right. Well,
this was your pick.
The second film, it was released in 1977. It's called House, or sometimes called Hausu, because the sort of last syllable is something that doesn't get pronounced in Japanese. So su is a sort of approved Japanese syllable. So Hausu. Anyway, and it's basically a story about a group of girlfriends at school, and they go to visit the aunt of one of them, and in her house, or hausu. And basically the house turns out to be haunted, not giving too much away. It's a sort of horror film, but that really underplays its strangeness. It's utterly, utterly weird and extremely entertaining, and is a real cult film, and one that everybody should know about and see. Actually, it's quite difficult to see, but More and more people should see it.
Definitely, I agree. And I'm looking forward to having a little bit more of an in-depth conversation about House in the second half of the show.
Yeah,
But the film that I picked tonight, when we decided on this subject matter, I had a good long think about just what the freak films and what I could talk about. And there was one that I'd only just seen for the first time a few years back
yeah,
when it got a reissue in the cinemas and things.
yeah.
And this film is just crazy, just loopy, completely like nothing you'll ever see. Much like House, just completely unique and one of a kind experience as a motion picture. And it's an American film from 1981. It's called Roar, and there's a lot of cats in tonight's show, isn't there? Because the cat plays quite a central part in the House as well.
Yeah.
But this film is all cats, all the time, every type of cat. And when I say cats, I'm not talking about your little pets at home. I'm talking about big cats. We've got lions, leopards, panthers. Um, what else? Tigers, cheetahs.
Yeah, I mean, every single cat. There was lots I didn't actually recognise. They're all there.
They're all there. Every type of cat, all in one place, all at one time, and completely and totally untrained, wild animals, all gathered together in a house.
Yes.
And chaos, utter and absolute chaos ensues. And this film is known affectionately as the most dangerous film ever made.
Yeah.
That's what people say about it, because the production of the film, it basically took 11 years for this film to complete production. And during the course of the production, over 70 people were injured, some of them quite severely, because they were hanging around with wild animals. so, so we're going to talk about this film first. Uh, as I said, it came out in 1981. It's called Roar. It's billed as an adventure comedy, and as a film, it is kind of. I would, as I was watching it again this morning in preparation for the show, what struck me about it is just how much of an absolute tonal train wreck this film is.
Tonal train wreck.
Yes. Because literally the film, I don't know, at some points it's tries to be like it's a comedy, but at the same time, then other times it feels like it's a horror film.
Yeah,
At other times, it, I mean, it's undescribable, this
it
film.
is. Yeah, that is a good way of putting it. A tonal train wreck. I don't think I've ever heard of a film described like that before.
Oh, okay. Well, I'll claim that as my own as my own invented term now. And perhaps it'll be adapted by the film loving community. But the film is indeed a tonal train wreck. I think this is one of those films that it's impossible for one to sit down and say that this is a good film or a bad film or a whatever, because it certainly has a lot of flaws in terms of
Yeah,
technically and things,
yeah,
but it's a film that I think kind of it's one of those things that just defies those those terms of saying whether it's good or bad, because it is just so completely and utterly unique as a
yeah.
piece of cinema, and just so completely balmy, crazy,
So mad.
that you literally you can't really say it's good or bad or whatever, and you can't even really categorize it at all. But I think it is a film that everyone should experience at least once,
Yeah,
because it's a lot of fun, isn't it?
it is a lot of fun. It's funny because until you mentioned it, I'd never heard of it before. And so I was sort of, I did a little bit of research and found out about the 70 odd people who were injured making it, including one of them who was scalped.
Yes, Jan de Bont, who of course, he was the cinematographer on the film, but of course he's someone who went on to be a quite accomplished film director in his own right.
Right.
I think he made one of the Speed films, didn't he? And he,
Oh, yes, he
uh,
did the first one, yeah.
yeah, so he kind of went on to
Was
have,
that Lara Croft Tomb Raider, I think, one of those.
yeah,
Uh,
yeah.
oh, well.
But yeah, he literally got scalped by a lion during the production, and had to go and have like sort of like 300 stitches in his head to put his head back on.
Yeah, 200. It says on Wikipedia, a lion lifted his scalp,
Oh.
requiring 220 stitches. Wow.
Hmm. Yeah, so just crazy, and not only that, but like lots of people, including, I mean, this film stars and was produced by Tippi Hedren, who perhaps most film fans would most know her for Alfred Hitchcock's The Birds,
Yep.
but she, of course, had a fairly distinguished
Oh,
career during the '60s and
she's still
early
alive.
'70s. Yes, indeed, she is still alive. But she was married to the director at the time, whose name was Noel Marshall, who was a film producer prior to this, who was one of the producers on The Exorcist, amongst
Right.
other things. And this was kind of their passion project because they became interested in conservation and in rescuing animals,
Yeah.
and they sort of had a uh, uh, animal shelter that they built on their property, and they started just basically adopting former zoo animals or just rescuing animals from various sort of situations. And they actually amassed this massive collection of big cats on this property. Now, the
Oh,
film is meant to be set in Africa, but there's a little bit of trickery there because the film was mostly filmed on their ranch,
in California or somewhere, was it?
somewhere like that.
The bit of it, I actually thought it was all in Africa, but there were bits where I thought those hills look slightly Californian.
Yes. Well, it is. There's quite a. It's quite effectively uses a sort of editing trickery to
Yeah.
cut in some footage that where Noel Marshall actually went to Africa and shot some footage of him riding around on bicycles and on motorcycles and things in Africa. And
Okay.
there's a scene at the beginning, which I guess the film doesn't really establish a lot about who this man is, but they show him at the beginning, sort of, you know, mysteriously wearing a lab coat in the middle of Africa
Yeah.
savannah there and putting a band-aid on somebody's leg. So I guess the implication there is that he's a doctor or something, but they don't really go into that. And then it transpires that the plot, such that it is, if you could say that the film has a plot, I guess the plot is that this man is living in Africa. He's gotten some sort of a research grant to
Yeah.
study how different species of big cats relate to each other living together. So they all live together on this little sort of estate that he has. And his family, who he seems to be estranged from his wife, Tippi Hedren, but
Yes.
they come to Africa to visit him. And
Yeah.
then what essentially happens is that he's on his way to go pick them up at the airport, but because he took so long, they left and they kind of cross paths. And so while he's away, the family ends up back at this place filled with all these big cats,
Yeah.
wild big cats, and
Mayhem
chaos.
ensues.
Sorry,
Mayhem ensues.
mayhem ensues while they sort of run around like Keystone Cops on this property, getting chased by literally hundreds of
Yeah.
cats.
Most of the film takes place in sort of 24 hours, or almost a lot of it in almost in sort of real time, doesn't it? because
Yeah, it does seem, which makes it even more extraordinary when you see that how long the production actually took. That a lot of
yeah,
the footage was shot over literally over years.
yeah,
But during the course of the film, it does really literally feel like it's all kind of happening almost, as you say, in
yeah.
real time. And the whole story kind of takes place over like a sort of a 24-hour period, really.
Yeah, well, I saw that Tippi Hedren was. I mean, there's one scene where Tippi Hedren gets picked up by an elephant and sort of
Yes.
swung around like a lasso, basically. And apparently, she fractured her leg there or ankle or something, and then contracted gangrene. And not much fun. But that happened in 1977. So
Yeah.
yeah, 4 years before the film came out,
Yes. Amazing.
which is incredible. It reminds me of this story of, I think it's in one of the Orson Welles films, and there's somebody gets punched in the face, and then he ran out of money, and the reaction shot of him of the sort of person going was filmed two
Was
and a half
kind of
years
filmed 4 years later, yeah,
later.
and on in a completely different country on the other side of the world.
Exactly.
Yeah, yeah. There's lots of Orson Welles stories like that.
Yeah.
But this film, I guess, was a bit like that as well. Like they literally pieced this together over years. They had massive production problems. At one point, the whole thing got flooded. I don't know if it was like a burst water main or something, as a burst
Right.
water main or a dam or something. So the whole thing got flooded out, and they had to kind of rebuild and lost all kinds of footage and things like that. And the film also stars Melanie Griffith, who is obviously went on to become quite a famous film star herself.
Yeah.
But here she was only something like 17 when the bulk of her footage was filmed, and she's actually the daughter of Tippi Hedren. And it also stars Noel Marshall's kids, his sons, John and Jerry Marshall, and they all. So this was a real family sort of passion project that they all made together, and
Yeah.
they all sustained incredible injuries and put themselves into harm's way uh, in numerous ways during this filming.
I mean, that's one of the things that you think, yes, 70 injuries. At the beginning, it says there was no animals were injured in this, but,
Yeah.
because, well, you sort of think, well, good, but 70 humans were extraordinary. And but what then when that's right at the beginning of the film and that's announced, isn't it?
Yeah.
And in the credits it also introduces the animals like Togar and I think Gary, yeah, Robbie, Gary, and Togar all get credits as actors. Um,
Yeah, and writers as well. They actually give them writing credit because I
right,
guess apparently a lot of this was filmed. They had a loose kind of story that they were filming, but basically a lot of the stuff they just responded to actual
right.
events because these were literally just wild animals. Uh,
Well,
and they obviously were slightly unpredictable, so they just ended up incorporating certain scenarios into the film as they happened.
yeah,
So that's quite
improv.
extraordinary as well.
Right. Well, the thing that amazed me almost was that only 70 were injured. Well, nobody was killed, really,
Yeah,
because, I mean, through the course of the film, basically they're all sort of wrestling with these lions and various other animals, escaping from them, being bitten by them, and
right.
the
Just
whole thing is
jumped on them and
jump, jumping on them, being jumped on by them. It's just a health and safety nightmare, basically. It really,
it is indeed. It is indeed.
it's the sort of,
The thing that strikes me really about it, why I enjoy watching it, is because of that quality of just complete mania about it. especially Noel Marshall, who this man was a film producer,
Right.
and he's married to obviously a famous actor,
Yep.
but he himself wasn't really a professional actor. And
Right.
throughout the film, there are moments where it does seem like he's just a little bit loopy. I mean, and obviously, I don't want to make light of, mental illness, but I mean, just in the sense that there are scenes where, I mean, the whole film, he's walking amongst, and I'm not exaggerating when I say this, literally like about 40 or 50 wild lions and tigers and
Yes.
other big cats, and he's literally like he yells through the whole film. He never speaks at all. He's always yelling, and he's going around to these animals, and he's just walking up to them and kind of slapping them in the face and going, "Hey buddy, how you doing?" And he's kind
Yeah.
of grabbing them by the scruff of the neck and shaking them, and he's sort of jumping on their back, and they're jumping on him, and
Yeah.
he'll get surrounded by like about 15 animals, and they all start jumping on top of him, and he's just like going, "Hey, how are you doing today? Hey buddy, and hey Fred, how's it going?"
Yeah.
And he's just like completely, like, it's just mad. You just
Yeah.
sit there the whole time going, "Oh my god, what is he
He's
doing?"
literally putting his head into the lion's mouth, literally and
Yes,
figuratively.
yes, with no fear, no,
With
like, and
Luca.
he's got a big smile on his face, and he's shouting and yelling and running around. And there's even one bit which is unbelievably harrowing, where two of the lions, because there's a little bit of a subplot in it, isn't there, about this? There's the sort of the alpha male lion of the
Yeah. Toby.
pride. Yes, and then there's another lion who's kind of trying to um, he's maybe trying to knock him off his throne so he can take
Yeah.
over. And this particular lion is always covered in blood all over his fur and everything. So he looks like a proper sort of something out of the Tiger, that film that we watched for the show a few months back.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, but the thing is, these are not CGI lions. These are actually real live animals. And at one point, these two animals actually start having a fight. So you can imagine two giant male lions having a go at each other. You kind of you'd think instinctively you'd be kind of like heading the opposite direction and trying to get as far away from that as
Good.
you possibly could. But this man runs up into them, yelling and screaming and going, "Hey, buddy, what you doing there? Come on, stop that now." And he just runs into the middle of them and pushes them aside.
Yeah.
And then one of them, of course, turns around and pounces on him. And
Yeah.
then he gets a great big gash on his hand and starts bleeding.
Yeah.
And then there are other scenes in the film, as continuity isn't a big strong point of this film, but there are certain scenes where he's walking around with this bloody bandage on his hand.
Yeah.
And you know that like these guys are actually literally just getting themselves sliced to ribbons by these things.
Well, there's a few bits of sort of dialogue that sort of summarizes when somebody else, I think it's his assistant zoologist, I think called Motivo,
Yeah,
and anyway, he's a great character as well. I
yeah,
think he was actually a journalist, but he somehow ended up in this film. But he's sort of just looking on in utter bemusement and sort of pity. Like, this guy's a complete lunatic, and there's one bit
and
where
he does seem genuinely scared at some points as
yeah,
well, because
I think
there are some
yeah,
bits when they're sitting in the house and he's literally looking around and all these lions are just
yeah.
surrounding him and looking at him, and you can tell he's kind of like, "Ooh,
He's
I
like the
don't think
voice
this
of
is
reality,
good."
basically, isn't he? Whilst
Yeah,
all
yeah,
this sort of madness goes on. And one stage he gets sort of bitten or scratched, and the what's his name? Hank, the sort of main character. He says, "You only got a few scratches, crybaby."
yes,
And then explains you got to let them see how strong you are. So that's sort of that's his basic MO, is you've got to
yes,
sort of go and treat all these animals, badly in order to sort of show them who's boss, to be the alpha animal pack
yes.
leader. And
Yeah,
it's
and he
sort of,
does run up to them sometimes, kind of going, "Ah," like,
Yeah,
shouting and like that. And I guess that maybe is the concept there, is that he's basically looking big so that they don't,
yeah.
want to take him on.
It does appear to work to an extent because when
Yeah.
everybody else is sort of they're just attacking them, and when it comes to him, the cats do seem to be
Mm.
more hesitant to sort of attack him. But
Yeah. And there's some genuine affection at some points there as well. It seems like some of the animals seem to really have an attachment to him.
yeah, it reminded me of me and my dog actually. Sometimes just sort of playing with the dog, but I know my dog's not going to rip my arm off.
Mm.
But that's how sort of he is. He's like sort of rolling around with them on the floor and just completely bonkers. And
Yeah.
it reminded one film this reminded me of was Grizzly Man.
Oh, Grizzly Man. Yeah. 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 Absolutely. Because that's the same kind of thing where he was just literally seemed oblivious to kind of common sense. He was just walking amongst these wild bears, just sort of,
Exactly,
petting them on the head and acting like he was one of them. And
exactly.
it was kind of like, yeah, that's possibly maybe not going to go well, dude.
Yeah. And in the Grizzly Man, it didn't go very well.
No, no.
This one somehow, well, it didn't go brilliantly. There were 70 people were injured, but nobody
Yeah.
was killed. So that's something, I suppose. Whereas,
Well, and apparently Noel Marshall sustained quite a few injuries, and at a
did he?
certain point he had to be hospitalized and
Did
had
he?
all sorts of operations and
Oh,
got infections and all sorts of things. And
really?
I mean, it happened to some of the other members of his family as well. There's even there's a scene with Melanie Griffith,
Yeah,
who is literally at one point she's in the kitchen of this house and they're all kind of running around manically away from all these lions that are just kind of following them around. And she's literally pinned to the kitchen floor by this lion
yeah,
who's literally just basically sitting on her and is basically chewing on the back of her head. And Tippi Hedren, her mother, is standing behind her looking quite worried. And Melanie Griffith genuinely seems absolutely panicked and terrified. And she's saying, "Mom, Mom, Mom," like this, and has this look on her face of absolute, like, oh God, I've had it sort of thing.
yeah.
And, there's scenes like that, which, there's not a lot of acting going on here, I don't think.
No. Well, the funny thing is, it's this weird sort of farce that because there's sort of it's this. I mean, both films are all about a house. A lot of it happens in this amazing sort of house that they built on a lake or next to a lake.
Yeah.
Um, and they're sort of running in rooms and running out of rooms and going upstairs. And just as one person comes in one room, somebody goes out the other one, and all this
Yeah.
sort of classic sort of fast stuff. And
Yeah, that's why I likened it to kind of Keystone Cops or those kind of, those old sort of Buster Keaton
yeah,
shorts where he's running away from the police and sort of ducking and diving. And, I think that's kind of what they were going for.
right.
But I don't know from, perhaps from your perspective, was that effective? Did you find it effective as humor or?
Well, I guess because I knew so many people had been injured, the whole thing was slightly painful to watch. I was sort of
Yeah.
wondering where the sort of the injuries are happening throughout the production.
Yeah.
And I guess, yeah, it was sort of. I mean, in the story, nobody particularly gets injured. He does get his hand bitten, but so I suppose that was some relief, light relief. Yeah. So
And it's hard to tell what's fake and what's real in the film. There's a scene where the kind of the villains of the piece are these two guys who are, they want to just shoot the animals and
that
hunt them.
was
And they don't think it's right that this guy has amassed this huge load of lions living there. They want to come and kill them all.
yeah.
And they're kind of the villains of the piece. And at one stage near the early part of the film, these two tigers, um, literally just start jumping on these guys and sort of mauling them,
Yeah.
and they're literally they're bleeding on their heads, and they're all and you literally, while you're watching it, it's hard to tell whether how much of it is staged or fake, or
Yes.
how whether they actually were sustaining injuries. It's
Yeah.
very difficult to be able to tell.
Well, that was one of the funny, well, things about that film. I was actually fairly sympathetic with with the hunters,
Right.
because I just thought, this is, you know, if there's a sort of animal, these animals attacking people, well, yeah, that's sort of what happens. Really, they do they do get taken out. In
Yeah.
So yeah, that was perhaps not the anticipated reaction from old Noel Marshall, but that's sort of how I was slightly feeling. Um, yeah, it's so strange. One of the other films that this or sort of stories this reminded me of was Heart of Darkness. Turned into or an inspiration for Apocalypse Now, of
Yeah.
a sort of white man living in the bush who's sort of gone crazy.
Yeah.
And I felt like this guy he'd sort of been on his own in the middle of Africa with nobody to talk to apart from animals, and he basically lost the plot.
Gone a bit round the bend. Yeah.
He had gone
I
around.
mean, I thought this morning watching it again, it sort of reminded me a bit of sort of, Fitzcarraldo, and like you said, the Werner Herzog, and those kind of this idea of like these people who have these sort of become fixated on these dreams,
Yes,
and they kind of, go to these absolute extremes,
yeah,
and um, that so there is a kind of an element of that, and kind of this film in and of itself became that, because apparently at certain stages the couple nearly went bankrupt trying to complete the film.
right.
They ran out of money several times and had all sorts of problems during the production and things, and they ended up having to sell all their, tough life. They had to sell, all five of their houses, their luxury mansions,
Well, my Rolls
the
Royces,
poor dears,
poor
to
things.
be able to finance this, and things like that. So there was a certain element of just sort of like, this is my dream. We're in this
Right.
far. We've just got to see this through.
Yeah,
We've got to get it done no matter what. We just have to get it done.
yeah.
So there's an element of that to it, I think.
Right. That obsession. That's true. Yeah, because definitely the character is very obsessed. Hank.
Yeah, he
Um,
does. Yeah,
Everybody around him was like, "What is he doing?" I think that was probably my biggest issue with the film. I did really enjoy it, but I just found him a very unlikable character because he was
well,
just sort of putting his family at risk, putting everybody else at risk, and he just thought it was a lark whilst everybody else was going to get
yes.
eaten, basically.
Yeah.
But
Well, yeah, I mean, and I think that's one of the things that makes it so appealing, because I mean, I mentioned a bit earlier on about the film. Technically, I mean, it's certainly beautifully shot, and there's certainly some moments photographically that are quite beautiful.
oh
But
yeah,
I think the film probably, it does have a little bit of a disjointed quality due to the length of the production and the
mm,
sort of the conditions that it was made under. But a lot of times I found, especially with the sound, there was a huge problems with the sound editing, and
uh,
there were certain moments where I could barely understand what people were saying because the recording wasn't very good.
right.
And there were times when they used a lot of sort of ADR to kind of drop little bits of dialogue over the soundtrack to kind of fill some gaps.
Okay.
Like there's a bit where, I guess, to explain why Melanie Griffith is suddenly lying on a bed, they kind of just strip in this little bit of dialogue of her saying, "Oh, I'm very tired. I just want to lie down." And then the next cut, she's lying down on a bed. So
Ah,
it's stuff like that. And there's this, I mean, the humor and stuff we've talked about doesn't necessarily work or is not particularly effective. And
no.
there's even a moment where when they're in this house and then all these lions pile in and they're carrying just an extraordinary image because there's literally about sort of 50 lions and tigers and stuff all just pile into the house behind them.
Yeah.
And some of them are carrying bits of sort of zebra carcass.
Yes.
And there's just blood all over the floor all of a sudden. They're all just sort of ravenously tearing around, ripping apart bits of this carcass. And then, of course, one of the characters has to say, "Look what the cat dragged in." And you just think, it's such an obvious and ridiculous sort of, but you kind of think, yeah, of course they were going to say that at some
Of course they
point.
were going to say that. It's almost maybe they were sitting there, and then that joke came into their head, and the whole film sort of developed from that one joke.
Perhaps. But yeah, it's just one of those moments that you just kind of go, oh, because it's all just so mad and crazy what you're seeing. And then if just like, of course they just said, "Look what the cat dragged in." Of
Yes,
course they
I
did.
mean, yeah.
So it's brilliant. It's just like that. It's just a crazy, mad motion picture.
It occurred to me. I remembered that thing that I'd forgotten earlier on that I was going to say. So another thing this brought to mind was the sketch in Monty Python's The Meaning of Life, where those sort of British soldiers in Africa, and there's something about a tiger there, and they all go, "A tiger in Africa." Of course, tigers aren't found in Africa, but somehow in this film, tigers are found in Africa.
Yeah, he's had them shipped in just to see what would happen, I guess. That's what his research grant for is apparently, is just to find out what would happen if you put a bunch of different big cats all together in the same place. That's his research, allegedly. So, but it doesn't seem to be a particularly controlled experiment, or he doesn't seem to be taking any notes or taking any film or anything. He's just sort of running around in the middle of them, sort of shouting at them. So you just kind of think like, what scientific sort of, model is he basing this on? I don't know. But as an experiment, it's a bit iffy. But certainly, I guess one other thing I would note too, because from my point of view, again, revisiting it today, was I found, because a lot of the film is built around, as you say, these kind of farcical sort of running around and up and down things and jumping off things and hiding in cupboards and things, trying to get away from these animals. But as the film progresses, it's only like about 94 minutes long. But I was kind of feeling towards the end of the film that there was a certain tipping point where it was starting to kind of wear out its welcome in terms of people just running away from animals and getting picked up by animals. And
I guess it didn't actually, I guess it does, but it could easily have done. I don't think I felt that particularly. I was sort of just going with it somehow. But there was a lot.
Perhaps because I've seen it. This was your first viewing, but I guess maybe because I've seen it a couple times before. Perhaps there was an element of there was less surprise for me seeing it.
Well, I guess, I mean, I sort of, from the beginning, I knew it was pretty crazy. So it's like the fact that this was what was happening and it didn't stop wasn't a complete surprise, I suppose I'd say. Yeah.
How do you feel? Because obviously the intention of the film was very well meaning in terms of talking about conservation and protecting the species and treating animals with respect. And how successful do you think that the film was in terms of meeting that objective?
I wouldn't say it was particularly at all, really. I mean, as I said, I was sort of slightly felt for the hunters because they were going to take out these sort of menaces to society. And it's not like we saw them in their sort of natural habitat where we sort of
Mm,
appreciate their life, like a sort of David Attenborough documentary.
mm.
They were in this sort of artificial environment, and they were rather annoying in a way. It's like, just keep the lions out of the house, put them in somewhere else, and then you could. I don't know.
Yeah.
I didn't feel like I learned an enormous amount about the animals really.
Yeah, I agree. There's very little of any real substance in terms of that messaging and that, and like you say about learning or appreciating the animals. And
No,
I think too, and because of those tonal shifts, where 1 minute it's kind of supposed to be this sort of slapsticky comedy, but then there'll be these sequences where this lion comes in all covered in blood,
yeah,
and the music on the soundtrack becomes quite sinister and
yeah,
menacing and atonal. And this thing is chasing Tippi Hedren around, and then at one point it literally rips her blouse off, doesn't it?
yeah,
And and obviously, I'm no, I don't think most people are going to complain about Tippi Hedren running around in her underwear, but
no,
at the same time, it kind of there was this sort of tonal,
yeah,
the film's constantly tonally shifting, and
yeah,
then after all this mayhem and craziness, in the last 10 minutes, all of a sudden the family just kind of go, oh, it seems like these lions don't want to hurt us after all. And oh, aren't they sweet? And then they, have some nice music with them walking around, soft focus, petting the animals and looking
yeah,
all happy. And,
yeah.
you know,
The animals are treated like pets, and wild animals are not pets.
yeah.
And they have sort of interesting lives out on in the savannah,
Mm,
and they also they have genuine threats from sort of hunters who are trying to sort of hunt them for less benign motives than the two in this film, as in
mm.
these two, because they're a menace, but because they're trophy hunters or whatever. And
Well, to be fair, those guys in the film, they wanted the coats, didn't they? They said they were going to harvest the skins
Oh, right. Okay. I
to
just thought they
sell.
were worried that these animals, they were, they were just a menace. But
No, and I think at this time, at the time the film was made, like people still bought fur coats and sold
right,
fur coats, didn't they? I mean, now I think it's very much frowned upon.
it
I
is.
don't know if it still kind of goes on or not. I mean, I suppose it probably does,
Yeah,
but back then it was much more of an issue of there was a
yeah.
real industry in
Oh,
sort of
yeah,
fur coats, wasn't there?
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah, to, it wasn't that sort of film. It wasn't sort of Born Free or something like that.
No, no, it was kind of born free, sort of on LSD, I think, or
Born
something.
Freaky, basically.
Yeah,
Yeah.
just completely mental. So, do you have any last thoughts? Because I'm just conscious of time.
Uh,
But
Although the film is it's very strange, but I would actually recommend people watch it. It's quite a film. It's funny because it's a family affair. There's like basically almost all the cast are one family, sort of
mm,
mum, dad, and their three children, and you'll see some extraordinary scenes. Really extraordinary. Watch it.
yeah, I agree. I mean, I think that's why I recommend it because it's not a film that I would necessarily say is a good film, but it's an extraordinary film, just
It is.
completely and utterly unique and completely entertaining on that what the freak level. Like it is literally just like a film that you just sit there going, I can't believe what I'm seeing.
Yeah.
I can't believe this. This is just mental. This is just
Yeah.
crazy. So, so, so yeah, definitely. I would recommend people check it out at least once. It's just kind of a film you got to see once.
Definitely. if there was a making of documentary, I'd love to see that, because there must have been some crazy things sort of that were recorded that they didn't include in the film.
There is.
Is there?
On this is the Blu-ray from Olive Films in the United States,
Right.
and there is a making of Roar documentary that is included on this, as well as another host of supplemental features
Right.
about the making of the film and things like that. So interviews and things like that. So um, if people are interested in or into the physical media, I would definitely recommend you
Right.
search that out, because um, it's worth picking up, because it's just such a interesting curio of a film that it's kind of one of those things that's kind of quite cool to have.
Yeah, definitely.
But anyway, yeah, definitely, folks, pick that up. And Jonathan, I think after all that craziness, I think we maybe might need a few minutes to compose ourselves.
I think we
So
might.
why don't we take a little break? Listeners, from your point of view, it's only going to be mere seconds. You're going to hear a little message about our social media spaces, where we'd love for you to come and find us and drop us a little line and let us know what you thought about Roar, or about lions, or about conservation, or about Tippi Hedren, or Melanie Griffith, or any subject, however tenuous, related to our conversation tonight. So by all means, come and visit us. And here's the details now.
Thanks for listening to the Film Swap podcast. If you like this podcast, please consider giving the show a rating or leaving a review. This helps other listeners find the show. You can follow the Film Swap on social media. We're on Twitter and TikTok at Film Swap UK, on Instagram at Film Swap Media, and on YouTube at Film Swap_podcast, and at Facebook at Film Swap the podcast.
And we're back. Jonathan, welcome back. What the freak? What the freak?
What the fuck?
These films, just, we're talking today about our double feature of WTF films. These are films that are so crazy, so out there, just so mind-bogglingly sort of bizarre that we just don't know what to make of them. But they're great for that very reason. They're awesome. Awesomely good fun to watch. And so tonight we've picked a couple of really cool films. So Jonathan, our second film tonight is quite a classic, a cult classic, a film that is much beloved, especially in Japan, but also I think in everywhere else in the world as well.
Yeah, nowadays.
And it also features cats. Well, a cat. Not as many cats as the last film, but
not as many.
But certainly a very significant appearance by a feline.
Yes,
a smaller feline.
Much smaller, much less sort of bitey, maybe.
But perhaps just as dangerous.
Maybe just as dangerous. But I'd say the main similarity is that both films are sort of very house-based.
They are indeed.
In fact, this one's so house-based, it's called House.
So, would you care to tell our listeners a little bit about House, if it's a film that they're not familiar with?
Yeah, well, as I mentioned earlier, it came out in 1977. It is a comedy horror, so it's sort of intentionally funny, and it's sort of, but very creative as well. All sorts of mad special effects and sort of weird cuts. 1 minute one thing's happening, next minute another thing's happening, and so basically the story, such as it is this the group of schoolgirls, I guess they're A-level students, we'd say, high school students, and they're going to see the main one, they've all got names sort of that they're named after their qualities. Like the heroine is called Gorgeous because she's gorgeous. She's very good looking. There's one called Kung Fu, who's very good at sort of martial arts. There's Prof, who's clever, and so it goes on. And they all go and stay with Gorgeous's aunt in this house, and the house turns out to be haunted by, among other things, a cat. And essentially, it's maybe giving things away a little bit, but not too much. Basically, they get eaten by objects in the house. So one by one, they all get picked off not in a gory way, in a sort of weird way. Like one of them gets eaten by a lampshade, one of them gets eaten by the piano, and that's sort of it, I think. I don't know if I'm.
Yeah, kind of. I mean, again, the plot almost seems incidental to the sort of visual spectacle of the film.
Visual spectacle is what it is. Yeah.
Yes, and the film does, as you mentioned, constantly, relentlessly uses all sorts of different sort of film and special effects and editing techniques. And it constantly, in a very playful way, is constantly sort of playing with the reality of what you're seeing and what's happening on screen. Yeah. And sometimes it almost revels in its own artifice, if that's the right way to put it.
It's very sort of postmodern meta film.
Yes. At a time when that wasn't really a done thing, was it? This film at the time it came out was totally and completely, certainly in Japan, absolutely sort of innovative in the fact that it was, as you say, that postmodern sort of
playfulness.
Yeah, playfulness, and it has a terrific sense of humor and a terrific it's just riddled with references to films and popular culture and advertising and all sorts of things.
It's all in there. It's a sort of there's a lot more going on in this film than in Raw, where Raws they're just sort of being chased around by big cats, whereas this one, it's almost as if he's sort of got the film history book and thrown it at his film. Basically, it's every single technique, trick, and it's all in there.
And sometimes even within one shot, like there'll be a picture of a couple of girls talking, and then one of them will point, and then they'll cut to her pointing at an image that's animated, or an image that's completely sort of different. And sometimes the lighting or the backgrounds will just change. Or there's this lovely shot when they all arrive at their destination where they're going to be where the house is, and they all get off the bus, and there's the background behind them is a painting, and then it emerges that it's actually a billboard, but then the background is also like this weird matte painting. And it's just this constant layer upon layer upon layer of these visual effects and weird sort of images and stuff that just constantly just come at you relentlessly throughout the entire film.
Yeah, I think this film, because this is the second time I saw it. The first time I saw it was about 10 years ago. And the place I was working, one of my colleagues, he was a keen film buff. And he said, "Have you heard of this film?" "No." "Well, it's something you should really watch." And he lent me the DVD. And he went off to do a PhD in sort of film studies at Glasgow. Toby Nielsen. You can look him up. Anyway, and I remember being sort of enjoying it, but being slightly sort of baffled. I mean, then when I watched it this time, I was still baffled, but I guess I was a bit more in awe of the film, of its extraordinary creativity. It just does not sit still in terms of sort of tricks and techniques. Just incredible. Yeah, absolutely incredible. And just the sort of, it's something you just cannot guess what's going to happen next. It's completely unexpected one moment to the next. And just terrific. And I like the fact that the director, Nobuhiko Obayashi, I think, yeah, hopefully I pronounced that right. Basically, he wanted to sort of to come up with the idea for the film. He asked his daughter, who was sort of like a preteen.
She was about 13 years old, apparently.
Yeah.
And she's credited as for the story of the film,
Right.
as a co-writer on the film.
Right. Yeah. And I think that's just terrific because children do have a slightly bonkers imagination sometimes. And reading about the things that she contributed to it, you think, yeah, well, probably I wouldn't have come up with something that mad. And it's a great way of. I mean, he did it in a way almost like sort of automatic writing, like sort of beatniks or whatever did. So automatic writing, letting their unconscious flow. So he thought, well, I don't even have to do it myself. I can ask my daughter, who's much more in touch with her sort of artistic impulses and her unconscious, and she can just sort of just open the tap for me. And terrific idea.
It was indeed, yeah, because children, of course, have that unbridled sort of creativity, and they're not yet sort of, hemmed in by all the sort of, the things that limit that imagination. And so he just went to her and he just kind of said, what kind of things scare you? Or she would make comments about, like there's a thing about watermelons in the film. And she said at one point, because they were bringing watermelons up from the well because they didn't have a refrigerator. And she said, well, they were bringing the watermelon up, that, it looked a bit like somebody's head with a weird smile on it. And he kind of went, right, let's put that in the movie. And they sort of, they have a whole sequence around these watermelons. And of course, he takes it even further than that. But it's just that kind of like constant playfulness and imagination and incredible visual imagination that just goes through this whole thing, and it's just constant, just one thing after the other.
Yeah,
it's quite extraordinary.
Yeah, it really is. It's an amazing film. One of the interesting but I mean, there is a lot of it's just having fun, that playfulness, but there is a sort of serious side to it as well because of course, being in Japan, I guess the war appears, and there's you see footage of nuclear bombs going off, but then it turns out that the aunt who they've gone to see had lost her fiance in the war, and so that's where the hauntedness came from. She what did she do? She said she was going to it was a haunted house that eats unmarried girls because she could never get married, and these girls were presumably going to get married. And the house couldn't sort of stand that because she was too jealous and too sad from the effect of the war, and which is interesting. I guess this is a theme in lots of Japanese films, sometimes overtly, and sometimes a bit more sort of subtly, like in this. It's not exactly a war film, but it does have that background, doesn't it?
There is a supplement on the Blu-ray.
Oh yeah.
That I watched that talks about Obayashi, because in all of his films there is a thread of anti-war
Right. Okay.
sentiment that runs pretty much through all his films, and especially his last film, which I'll maybe talk about a bit towards the end.
Yeah.
And throughout his entire creative career, he's has a very strong anti-war messaging, and that runs through his entire um,
Right.
catalog of films.
Interesting.
So, and this film is no different. There is, although it is quite subtle, and
Yeah.
it's sort of kind of tied in with the story of this woman in the house. That messaging is there,
Yeah.
and so I think there is, despite the fact that this film is quite sort of crazy and very offbeat, and I had the same reaction as you the very first time I saw it, which was many years ago.
Yeah.
um, I was just totally like, what the F
Yeah.
was that? What is that? You know, um, I just didn't know what to make of it. I'd never seen anything like that before.
Yeah.
It was just totally like, well, what was that?
Yeah.
And I couldn't work out even whether I liked it or not.
Yeah.
And it was sort of like only subsequently over the years I've seen it a few times. And now I absolutely love it. And I think it's absolutely wonderful
Yeah.
piece of film, incredibly entertaining and inventive.
Yeah.
And I think it's, again, one of those films that you can get a little bit more out of it every time you watch it, because you
Definitely.
can pick up on little bits, little visual gags, or
Yeah.
little sort of references or things that you didn't sort of pick up on in the last time you watched it. Or
Definitely.
so you can always, there's just like a rich uh, gold mine of stuff there to enjoy.
Definitely. And if you're Japanese, I'm sure you get even more references in there. Uh,
Yeah, yeah, definitely.
yeah.
There'll be a lot of cultural stuff on there that would go over your and my head,
Yeah.
presumably. Um, I noticed this time watching it, that there's a lot of little cameos of sort of actors and things in there,
Right.
because they're obviously Japanese references.
Yes.
They wouldn't necessarily be things that you would pick up on. But of
No.
course, obviously, because I'm more of a film nerd and I have a particular interest in Japanese sort
Yeah.
of genre films and stuff like that,
Yeah.
I picked up a few sort of the little cameos and things.
Okay.
There is at one point a couple of the actors from the Monkey TV
Oh,
series,
I
which
love
I think,
Monkey.
yeah, I think I remember you're quite a fan of that growing
Yeah.
up. And so there's a couple of the actors who make little cameos in it. And I also noticed there's a bit when the teacher, because there's a little bit of a subplot of the teacher who was supposed to sort of chaperone the girls on this trip,
Right.
but he never actually quite gets there and makes it
Right.
to be there with them. But
Yeah.
there's a bit where he's on the highway caught in a traffic jam,
Yeah.
and behind him, but they have a reference to those 70s trucker films.
I do.
Uh, in Japan, there was a series of, back when sort of CB radios and truckers things were quite popular.
Yeah.
There was a series of sort of action adventure comedy films, um, featuring these two truck drivers who go around having adventures with
Okay.
their souped up
Ah,
truck. Bunta Sugawara is the
okay.
name of the actor, and in that scene, he's in that truck from that film series behind him, and he's leaning out the window, going, "Hey, hurry up!" And he's honking his horn, going, "Hurry up and move! Get out of the way!" Sort
Right.
of thing. And I recognized him this time, which is something I'd never picked up on
Ah,
before.
how funny.
So there's all kinds of things like that, and there's loads of references to films and little shots and things that are obviously lifted from famous films and
Right.
things
Yeah.
like that.
Yeah.
So it's a
It's
lot of fun.
such a fun film. Such a
Yeah,
fun film. As it says, somebody's described it as Alice in Wonderland of the horror genre.
yeah,
Or on the BFI, they say The Evil Dead meets Yellow Submarine.
yes. that's a good one. Yeah,
Yeah,
because there's lots of, I mean, yeah, these girls all, I mean, there's one bit that's quite famous where the girl gets eaten by the piano,
yeah,
and there's all like crazy, lots of crazy scenes like that. And
yeah.
I love the Kung Fu girl,
Yes,
who, we were talking about, before about Tippi Hedren, but there's
yeah,
this girl who basically spends the majority of the film running around in her underwear doing kung fu moves with every turn. There'll just be something will happen, and then they play this little silly sort of motif in the background, and then she jumps around and karate kicks and knocks things out of the way, and it's
yeah.
just very fun and amusing
And
throughout it.
but it also has quite sort of beautiful bits as well.
Mm, mm,
There's sort of one sequence where the dad and the daughter are on their sort of balcony of the house, and the sort of sunset, and they're sort
mm,
of it's being filmed through a sort of like a glass tiled wall or a glass brick, glass those sort of glass bricks, and it's just a very sort of unusual and striking looking piece of
mm,
film. And then somebody else later is in the water, and there's a red light shining in it somehow,
mm.
and that's just also really uh, beautiful bit of
Really.
film as well. Yeah, it's terrific. Feel like I should watch it again.
Yes, indeed. Indeed, you should. Yes, it's yeah, it is like one of those films that you could just stick it on any time and just end up getting sort of pulled into it and just enjoying, just letting it pull you along through all this madness and all these weird images and these
Yeah,
sort of little jokes and gags and the visual humor and the sort of weird visual effects, and um, it's just terrific. I
yeah.
mean, he came from he started out as an experimental filmmaker and then
Really?
kind of graduated into doing television adverts.
Okay,
And although I couldn't name any famous TV advert directors myself, apparently he was quite a well-known,
right.
famous uh, director of commercials.
Okay.
And
Ridley Scott
then
started
so
doing that, didn't he?
sorry.
Ridley Scott started doing that.
Yeah, absolutely. Ridley and Tony Scott both started out
Yeah,
making television commercials before they graduated into films,
yeah.
and yeah, Obayashi was the same way.
Okay,
And all of his films have this kind of this style, although some more than others,
okay.
more extreme. This one's obviously quite extreme and just kind of just throws everything but the kitchen sink in there. Well, actually, throws in a couple of kitchen sinks as well.
Ha, ha.
But but all of his films have this kind of playful, inventive, sort of really imaginative, kind of layered quality to them that
Right.
make them a lot of fun. And I wanted to recommend, in particular, his very last film, which he
Okay.
made. Sadly, he passed away a couple of years ago.
Right.
He was in his 80s, though, and
Yeah.
unfortunately, he succumbed to cancer. But his final film that he made, which I'm pretty sure I saw it on Mubi, and I'm pretty sure that it might still be available there.
Okay.
But it's called The Labyrinth of Cinema, and it's an absolutely just wonderful, wonderful sort of piece of work, and it's all very much. It's kind of in one sense, it's a time travel comedy. It's about these people who kind of jump through through time through different films.
Right.
But the film has a really strong anti-war message, and it very
Okay.
much sort of looks at, really has a really clever way of presenting in our culture, in our popular culture, how violence and sort of war are depicted,
Right.
and how those things, how sort of culture is used to sell these things to us.
Right.
and to sort of normalize these this state violence and things
Interesting.
that we sometimes take for granted in films and things.
Yeah.
So I think it's a really wonderful, quite profound film, and has quite a moving ending.
Right.
It's very beautiful, and I think I would definitely, after you're done watching House, I would go and seek that film out as well and see
Right.
that his first, and we're talking about his very first film, and I also highly recommend his. Well, I recommend all his films, but I
Right.
would definitely recommend his final film, which
Okay.
I thought. Unfortunately, it's not available in physical media
Okay.
uh, yet. Hopefully, one day it will come out, but it's really worth seeking out as well.
Yeah. Well, I see they've got an article on the BFI site, Where to Begin with Obayashi. And yeah, that's the one thing about this house. It's the film is not that easy to to get sort of cheaply now. Basically, the sort of Criterion is now the only Blu-ray you can buy, because the
Yeah.
Arrow one is sort of out of print, and it's like almost 30 quid, which is
Uh, Sorry, it's Eureka Masters of Cinema.
oh, Eureka, yeah,
Right here.
yeah, Eureka,
Yeah. So unfortunately, yeah, this has gone out of print. I'm not quite sure why. I'm perhaps because there's a reissue of some kind planned in the near future.
let's hope so.
But you're right. There is still, as far as I know, the Criterion Blu-ray in the US is still available. But yeah, for us in the UK, that would be quite an expensive proposition to get that shipped over.
Yeah,
But obviously, if you're for our listeners who are in the United States and Canada, it is available from Criterion,
yeah,
and presumably it'd be on the Criterion channel as well. Unfortunately, at the minute we looked into it, and we're recording this in early August of 2024, and at the minute in the UK, there is basically no way to see this film.
no,
So, which is really um,
disappointing.
disappointing and very odd because I think it is quite an established kind of cult classic, and so I was a bit puzzled
Yeah,
when when we talked about it, and it turned out that there was no way for you to see it, was there? And
no,
we had to take steps. We had to
no,
take some
exactly.
steps to in order to enable you to be able to watch it.
We did indeed.
But but anyway, people out there, if you're listening and you're in the UK and Europe, um, um, hopefully at some point in the future that will change and the film will become a little bit easier to get hold of.
Let's
But
hope
it's
so.
definitely worth seeking out when you get a chance.
Yes, I would say so. Yeah, it's really quite crazy and but enjoyable on many levels, and just very original. So I would say go and check it out.
Yeah, that is the one thing about both of the films that we're talking about tonight is that they are quite totally singular and unique pieces of cinema.
Yeah,
I think you would, there is nothing like these films, either of them. They are quite literally one of a kind
yeah,
experiences.
yeah,
And so I can't recommend either of them highly enough. I think you definitely, if you want to go to see something a bit different and a bit sort of a bit crazy, these films are definitely worth checking out.
definitely, definitely.
So, Jonathan, was there any last comments or anything you wanted to make about House before we wrapped it up for tonight?
Uh, well, no, I'm glad that his other films are worth checking out, because I hadn't even thought of that. Come to think of it, I've just been sort of gobsmacked by this one.
Yeah, he wasn't necessarily that prolific,
Right.
but I mean, all of his films are really interesting and fun and very creative. I mean, he was just had an incredibly uh, vivid imagination and had a really great way of somehow coalescing all these ideas and things into a whole.
Yeah.
And making them very, engaging and fun. So yeah, definitely, he's definitely worth checking out.
Yes.
All of his films.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, certainly this one, I can say.
I would almost kind of liken him in a sense. Well, I was going to say he's a bit kind of David Lynchy in terms of his sort of his approach to things.
Right.
But I don't know if it's really a fair comparison because I think David Lynch. I don't know. Maybe that's a fair comparison.
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, that seems well from this one film. It seems sort of fair because they've got both a very singular approach, and I mean they are obviously very different, but there's singularity and the sort of surreal quality of their films.
Yeah, certainly that's why I was thinking because David Lynch's first film, Eraserhead, is very much in the sense of like House, that very playful, sort of very imaginative, kind of off the wall, sort of, what's going on here, kind of,
Yeah,
sort of style. So maybe that is a fair comparison. But I think Obayashi, sorry, tends to his films are much more sort of humorous. Like he has much more of a sense of. Well, I don't know. David Lynch has got a sense of humor as well, doesn't he?
definitely
He's
does.
quite
Yeah,
playful and
big sense of
fun,
humor.
and has funny bits in his films and things. So
Yeah,
I'm going to stick by with that, Jonathan. I'm going to say that I think that they are kind of there's a comparison to be made there between those two.
and the funny thing is they both came out in the same year, Eraserhead, and both 1977.
Well, there you go.
There you go.
There you go. So, well, great. Well, Jonathan, I've enjoyed talking about these films and I enjoyed revisiting them for the show. So, Jonathan, you and I have got some great plans in the fall for Film Swap.
Yep.
And we're lining up some really interesting guests and things. And it might be a good idea to hit that follow or subscribe button so that you get alerted as soon as we put something out there for you to listen to.
Very sensible, I think.
I think it's a good idea.
Yeah.
It's a really good idea. And tell your friends as well, just to let them know. Send them a link, send them share it, and say, hey, you should listen to these two because they're talking about some really cool films, and you should listen to this too.
Yeah.
So that'd be great. And in the meantime, keep an eye on filmswap.uk as well, because that's where that's your one-stop film swap shop where you can find out all the information about the latest episode, and you can access all the past episodes, and you can find lots of other prizes and surprises. So by all means, pop in there and take a look, bookmark it.
Please
and
do.
come back often. And we'd love to hear from you. As I said earlier on, drop us a line. Let us know what you think of House and Obayashi films and cats and pianos that eat people and
eat people.
watermelons and anything else that you might want to mention off of the back of listening to this episode, because we'd love to hear from you. We always enjoy hearing from people when they reach out to us. So please, by all means, drop us a line. So on that note, folks, we're going to say goodbye, but we will be back soon. So watch out for that.
Yes.
And in the meantime, watch lots of cool films and take care of yourself, because it's a bit of a mess out there at the minute. And we don't want any harm to come to you. We want you to stick around and watch films with us.
Absolutely.
Okay. So on that note, take care, folks, and we'll see you soon. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Oh, the things these nerdy middle-aged men get up to.